Hello everyone, welcome back to Altengrad city in City Skylines. We took the tram through the finished parts of the city last time. Today we are going to go back to building though. Let's return to the project from few episodes back, where we did the remnants of the city walls. I want to continue finishing the edges of the city in here, and what better project to do that with than a botanical garden. It's going to have trams going to it, we will do lots of landscaping, fix the train tracks nearby, and do more farms. Let's go. So we are going to start with those train tracks, because back when we were building the second terminus station in this part of the city, I only created just some temporary connections outside of the city, and also tracks that are connecting to that little tunnel that we did in that wall episode, like I mentioned. Now, this was the first episode, or the first time I opened Altengrad or any of my series with the new network multi-tool. I was doing this on the stream, I think. So that was really nice to use it, but unfortunately at this point it still had some restrictions that it doesn't have today. By the way, it already is fixed. Everything is fixed about it. You, for example, couldn't pick multiple nodes for the sloping function. So as you can see, I was still using the Electrix's road tools for this purpose. But I no longer use the Electrix's road tools. I use just the network multi-tool because it's just so awesome. Anyway, as you can see, we had to do quite extensive changes to the landscaping around the edges of the map here, because I really wanted to make the tracks only go with something around or preferably below 1% grade, because this is going to be also a track for cargo, which is just going to circle around the city and go into some of the more industrial parts. There's actually going to be industrial areas even close by, but we're not going to do that today. It's going to be built later. So in order to do that kind of grade, or that kind of slope, I had to do some changes for the trains and really make the terrain much flatter. Even though I really wanted to keep it so that the railway is going to go in some sort of a valley and the mountains on the sides of it are going to remain there, because that's just going to look nice in those low angle shots, away from the city, facing away from the city. Anyway, that's done. So I think I'm kind of fine with the tracks, how they turned out in here. I also had to do like a segment where the tracks are running parallel, because they are both going into different elevations. Because this terminus station on this part of the city is actually quite tall. I think it's the highest station in the city by far. So all these tracks kind of need to go up into it. Or, the edges of the map are so tall as well that all the tracks, all the infrastructure just goes down towards the river, towards the city, right? So these tracks towards this station, they don't really go down that much because the station is just so tall or highly positioned. Anyway, let's now go to the main focus of today's project, and that's going to be the botanical garden. So I really wanted to do the botanical garden with one particular building in the center of it all, and that's going to be the Victorian Palm House. Now, I know, Victorian Palm House, probably not exactly Central European building, but I really like how it looks like. It reminds me of some botanical garden structures that I have seen around here, so that's gonna be fine, and it's just a nice looking building overall. I really do like even the palms inside, so that's gonna be like a nice exhibition for the people of Altengrad. But as you can see in this case, when I'm already doing some kind of infrastructure, I am using that network multi-tool because it just more consistently shows the great numbers. So I was really paying attention to that tram road. This is, of course, the tram road that goes from that terminus station. We could have seen that a couple of episodes back, and it kind of loops around this place and then goes back into that old bridge, into that market square. Now, because there is that tram loop, the trams that are crossing the river are not directly cutting through this area, for example, into the botanical garden. I needed to make some kind of a justification for it, because I really didn't want to put those tracks like that. I wanted to make it a bit more interesting. So with all these blocks that I was doing there with the infrastructure, I also made the roads go higher to create these kinds of natural ridges, so that it's going to be much clearer that we could not have put the trams to just cut through this area straightly, okay? So they are just going to go into that government area, the government plaza, and just into that bigger intersection that eventually leads into that train station and here. So in here there is going to be just a loop and some kind of roads that are going to lead outside of the city. By the way, you could have seen me create that road that just has that slightly different model without the sidewalks, with the trees, kind of an alley of trees on the sides. And I'm thinking that that's probably some kind of a very old ancient path that used to be here since forever, really, in the medieval ages as well. And it was just gradually upgraded to some kind of better surface so that it can even support cars going on it. So it's no longer just a gravel or mud road or something, but the path probably remained. And in its original configuration, I kind of wanted to make it so that it's just kind of alone. Maybe some really old buildings were built along it towards the center of the city, and the modern parts, the modern blocks, are just built slightly away from it to kind of keep that remains in here. Anyway, that's all connected in front of the Botanical Garden, and then it continues on a slightly wider road outside of the city. I'm thinking that the Botanical Garden was probably built not really so long ago in this time period, maybe 50 years ago, something like that. And together with it, they also built, well, actually, maybe the Botanical Garden itself, the building, is older, but they definitely built kind of recently the infrastructure in front of it. They upgraded it for the trams, of course, so that's when the loop appeared here, and the intersection, the whole intersection, obviously received some kind of refurbishment because it needed to now support the rails for the trams. Okay, so that probably received some upgrades. Now, we are going to focus on building the actual inside of the Botanical Garden. And I really wanted to make the entrance of the entire garden really fancy, really grand looking. So I decided to put the Victorian palm house kind of higher compared to the street level, and create these nice stairs going towards it. I used that zoo entrance from Park Life, I think. I converted it into PO to get rid of the lions on the roofs because that wouldn't really fit well. And otherwise, the building just looks absolutely fine for this place. Actually, ideally looks for this place. And then I did these stairs with the planters on the sides. I'm later going to put some nice trees into the planters here, and I did these walls around the stairs, and it's just looking really fancy, like something like a palace, but it's actually like a public place, a botanical garden. So that's kind of nice. I like it. Now, these stairs are leading directly to the center of the palm house, so it's also following some geometry. And by the way, I really wanted to make it angled like this, so it's not really perpendicular to the street, which might actually give you an idea that maybe the streets were refurbished, like I said, for the trams and for the loop, right? Now, where the stairs end and the second set of stairs start, I decided to put this little open, like a pavement area, and I was heavily, as you can see, using the node controller for these kinds of manipulations. And this is one thing that you can really do with the node controller a lot. You can just alter these shapes of networks, these pedestrian paths and everything to really fit your project. So I, for example, decided that right in front of the stairs, or in the middle of the stairs, the path is just going to be super wide, and then it's just going to nicely go back to its original shape. I really like that shape right now, and it's just going to look really good. And by the way, it's all functional still. People can still walk on it, so that's going to be important later, because I do plan on making this place functional with pedestrians walking around it. Now, the palm house is basically going to be inside this little area marked by the paths. So there's that inner circle around the building that's right next to it, and then there are going to be 4 paths just radiating from the building to the outer circle. And obviously there's going to be the exhibitions all around it with some fancy looking exotic trees and bushes and flowers and everything like that. So hopefully that's going to turn out looking nice. Now, I also wanted to create something with water. And by the way, I did promise that I am actually going to build this. I just remembered because long time ago, when we were doing the waterfront on this side of the river, I also did that little, like a canal entrance, you know, the little arch that's going into the river. And I said back then that there probably used to be like a little stream joining the big river, but as the city grew, they decided to put the river into some sort of a tunnel and free up some space for the city expansion. So maybe this is actually the stream that the city builders, the city planners decided to divert into the tunnel. I suppose that that little pond that I did in front of the botanical garden was not there. Maybe it was actually artificially created just so that the entrance into the botanical garden is going to look fancier, or maybe it was back in the day part of the garden itself. But like I said, when they did the refurbishment for the trams, maybe they just cut it away from it. But it doesn't really matter. I just wanted to do something blue in there, even for just, introducing some different color into the area. But I really do like the water in there. It's just in like a little valley with the entire garden and everything. The trams are going down towards it. I think it's going to look really, really good. If you imagine just taking the tram down there, it might be like a nice chill, Sunday trip into the garden with the pond in front of it. Anyway, this stream, it was a bit of a problem to set it up at first because I just wanted to do it with the landscaping tools, but doing these very narrow streams, the water physics are not exactly all that optimized for these because you have the mesh which the water follows, and the mesh is actually kind of rough. I suppose it has to be for like simulation's sake. So the disadvantage of this is that small streams, very, very narrow streams, are not exactly looking all that great, especially if they are very sloped, if they are just fast flowing down. It's not just a standing water, right? So I eventually decided to just do the stream by putting a terraforming network all the way to the edge of the map, through the stream, through the center of the stream. And this time I had to use the network multi-tool to slope it because for some reason you cannot use the slope function in the Electrix's road tools on a terraforming network. I never used it before, so I wasn't really sure if I never used it before, but yeah, you couldn't use it. It just disappears for some reason. But the network multi-tool does work, so that was okay. And we managed to do a nicely sloped riverbed for that little stream. Eventually, it's not really that small. I really wanted to make that stream much thinner, but the water physics just didn't allow it. I eventually ended up, I'm not showing it in the time lapse at all, but I eventually ended up just putting the water sources in like, 20-meter distances away from each other on the entire length of that stream, just to really keep it looking nice, because there were some parts where it was suddenly like super wide, it was just flowing out of the riverbed, and then it was just getting super thin. Sometimes it even dried up somewhere, so it wasn't really flowing anymore. It was just looking weird, so I didn't really care about the functionality of the river, obviously the flowing water, but I just wanted it to look nice, okay? So that's why I used a couple of tens of the water sources inside the river to just really make it good looking. And there's obviously a much bigger water source inside this pond, and as you know, the water sources in the game work by also providing the drain points. So if you have a water source that's much lower, and higher water is flowing towards it, then it's actually going to act as a drain. So no matter the amount of little tiny sources inside the stream, the big source in the pond here is just going to take all that water and going to stabilize it so it's not going to overflow onto these roads. And later I'm going to put that little tunnel entrance on the side of this pond to really symbolize that the stream is continuing through the pond back under the city parts in here into the big city. And by the way, one possible justification for this kind of a big project, because this area probably would have been filled in with all kinds of soil and material to really fill the original valley for the stream. And I'm thinking that it might have been done using, for example, the material from the old city walls, because they were running right through this area. If you picture the overall area of the city, of this part of the city, then the city walls probably went directly over the parts where the railway currently goes, which is kind of realistic. Well, actually, that's highly realistic. Usually in these kinds of cities, you had railways appear pretty much at the same time in history when these kinds of city walls were just becoming completely obsolete and just not needed at all. So they were dismantling them and making way for the railways. So that makes perfect sense. And lots of these materials from the city walls, they either had to be just piled somewhere or used to, for example, flatten some surfaces for like rail yards or stations, fill some kind of embankments for stations or just railways. And I think I'm mentioning that even in some older videos that probably used to be the case in Altengrad. But they might have as well. They might as well have just filled the stream bed and created that little tunnel for the stream. Okay, so that's just the justification. But to be completely fair, I just really wanted to build a pond in here in front of the garden. And later I was just coming up with these possible causes for the geometry of this place, okay, and the functions. Anyway, we are now going to return back into some of these places that I needed to detail. You could have seen me, for example, detail that second half of the tunnel entrance that we did some time ago, because now it's needed to finish that. I'm also doing some trees inside the botanical garden on the edges of it, and some kind of like a maintenance area for the garden where probably the gardeners reside when they are in work, and all kinds of equipment is stored there. And it's basically like a back entrance into the garden, maybe as well for vehicles, because they obviously can't get up the stairs at the front. And now I'm going to do the most satisfying part of this entire project, and that is going to be filling the insides of the botanical garden with all these kinds of different trees. And I remember, maybe you guys remember too, when I was still building my first city, the Rockdale city, I also did a botanical garden in there. I think the video is still up on this channel. And even back then, I mentioned that what's the most beautiful part about these gardens is that you can just use all kinds of trees that you have, even trees that might not be like super specific for Central Europe, especially this time, in this time period, because I suppose that it might have been a bit more difficult back in the day to acquire, like, I don't know, saplings or something for these trees, or seeds for the flowers or something. So I suppose that this exhibition of the botanical garden would have been a lot more impressive. Now, I didn't really go all that crazy with some of the trees, even though I did place a couple of, for example, Australian trees in here, but I didn't really place like palms or something outside of the palm house, of course. I suppose that they kind of need more heat or something. They probably wouldn't survive the winter. I don't know, or maybe they're just somehow artificial, but probably not. Botanical gardens don't really have that, right? So I wanted to make it so that if you are standing on the street in front of the garden or in front of the main entrance, you are just going to see the palm house in its full glory. It's not going to be just hidden behind some trees. So I only put the very tall trees behind the garden in the back part of the entire exhibition, and in front of the palm house, as you can see in the time lapse, I'm also always looking at these views. In front of the palm house, I'm just building some bushes and some flower decorations everywhere around it. I really don't want to keep any of these places open because that's just going to be a waste of space inside. I really do want to fill everything in. Now, also, there's this like a circuit that goes underneath the tracks. I'm thinking that's like a part of the garden where some kind of more ordinary trees are with some kind of specialties probably or something like that. It's like a more ordinary looking part of the arboretum, more natural looking, okay? But the part around the palm house, that's like more artificially manicured, I suppose, with all these different flowers and exhibitions of like exotic stuff, right? So that's the justification for it. Anyway, that is done, and we are now in front of some serious expansion of these areas. Basically, the finishing expansion of these areas. Because I have lots of blocks in here. The Botanical Garden basically forms the edge of the city, but until this edge, or up to this edge, I still need to fill all of these blocks. So I wasn't really sure how to do it, and I'm just going to skip through it mostly in the time lapse because it's all about just positioning all of these same buildings over and over again. Because seriously, in Altengrad, there's only a handful of structures that I haven't placed yet, and all these let's say more ordinary buildings, I'm pretty sure that every single one of those I already positioned somewhere. I do have a couple of fancy buildings, big structures still up my sleeve, but I do have some special places for them. I don't really want to just burn them in some of these just mundane expansion blocks, right? Anyway, I didn't really want to put all of these blocks into like residential purposes, so I wanted to create even some not so good looking industry, some kind of light industrial buildings, just a mix of some random structures, maybe even dirty stuffs, put some decals over them because, maybe I am planning already some kind of changes to how the city is going to look like in these parts. So some of these places might be subject to change later. As you can see, I was just copy pasting the palette of buildings like I usually do. And I was just picking the various buildings with Move It with it, although I was just mostly just selecting like a bunch of buildings and copying them in bulk into these places because it really is all about the quantity in most of these blocks because that's just going to complement the rest of the city nicely. Now, this is exactly what I was talking about. This is the other edge of the canal. So I used exactly the same technique as before. I just used the procedural object version of the bridge. And inside the bridge, I put like an asphalt block so that if you have like an angle shot looking inside the tunnel, you're just going to see black and not some unfinished terrain. Now I'm also building this quay on the side of the pond, on the side of the road, which might give you an idea that maybe the road wasn't really built here when the pond was built, and maybe the road was actually cut into the pond slightly to make way for the road. Now, these statues I got just recently, and I decided to put like maybe like the founder's statue right next to the entrance into the botanical garden. So that might be like a nice touch, looking quite okay. Now this entrance in front of the garden, I wasn't really sure about it. I'd finally decided to make it into some kind of a parking lot. Well, not really like an official parking lot, but back in the day, cars were still relatively new, so I suppose everyone was just parking where they wanted to, and that place kind of feels okay for that. But obviously, the majority of people are either going to walk to this place. By the way, I created those pedestrian paths, so there's like a little park in front of the garden anyway, and I put some pedestrian path through the place. I got rid of some sidewalks on the side of the main roads so that only the pedestrian paths are going to be used. But also, a lot of people are going to arrive by the tram. So that's exactly this one right here. There's only one station right next to the loop, so it's going to be serving both people just going into the garden and boarding the trams back. And we also need to do lots of these wires. So these days, usually when I do these kinds of loops, and I think we still have a couple of loops that we need to do in Altengrad, I'm usually just copy pasting the wires that I already did somewhere else in the city because, why not reuse what's already done? Now, this is the most important bit, and that's making this place functional. You could have actually seen me back in just a couple of minutes back in the time lapse where I did the park. I actually painted the park area in this place, and now I downloaded the invisible entrance into the park. Well, it's not really invisible, it's just gateless. It only has that path. And I put it in the front of the park, and just connected some little paths going up the stairs and connecting to already built paths that I did around the park, because those are actually functional. Then I also downloaded the cube services, even for the parks by Nylin. I'm using them or for commercial or all these kinds of all these kinds of other services. So there actually even are these kinds of blocks for entertainment inside of these parks. So I put them here and there in the botanical garden and covered them with lots of trees. They have a slight disadvantage because they attract crowds of people to stand in front of them. So it might look a bit strange with people, just like crowds of people standing inside trees. But I really tried to just put lots of trees around them. And the botanical garden is used by a lot of people. A lot of people arrive by trams. A lot of people use the pedestrian paths to walk up the stairs and everything. And it's looking really, really alive. So that is very, very satisfying. Every time, I say it many times, but every time you build something and you just make it so that pedestrians can use it in the game, that's very good. And this time it actually is a botanical garden. So it almost works completely with, with the game's functionality. So that's really good. So these are the shots that I'm kind of proud of, because this is the low angle view that I was really aiming for of that palm house building, how it's just standing there alone in that sea of green all around it, with the gatehouse nicely below it and the trams just running below on the street. That's really good. That's what I was really trying to do. So this is the edge of the city, but I'm not really saying that it's going to remain the edge of the city forever, of course. It might have some expansion. Some of these roads that are running from this area are probably very old. Some of them are actually just ending in fields, not really continuing anywhere. Maybe they've been just disused. And I also built some kind of paths just radiating from this area to the edge of the map, and farm fields, lots of farm fields, because I really do want to push for the completion of the outer parts of the city. Not just the build parts, the suburbs and everything, but also the farms and everything else, because I really want to finally start doing those very zoomed out shots of the city, where you can just see not just the buildings themselves, but all the places around the city that are completely done, because that's just going to complement it very, very well. Anyway, that is going to be all for today. Thank you for watching. If you liked the episode, you can do the usual: commenting, subscribing, sharing, liking, and you can also become a channel member if you want to directly support the channel. Big thanks to all the channel supporters that we currently have. I really do appreciate it, guys. Thank you. Anyway, take care and goodbye.